All right, I think we're live now. Hi everyone, I'm Laura Zapata. I'm one of the co-founders of Clearloop, and I am here to say Happy New Year. Oh my goodness, it's already February, but we left off last year with a series of little videos that we're doing live to go over some of the concepts that Clearloop is trying to tackle, and we figured we would just kick off this year with some more. We left off the year hoping that this 2021 is going to be the year of climate action. And we are really trying to put that into the world so that it becomes true. But we have some exciting announcements that are going to be coming up in the next couple of weeks and coming months. So stay tuned for that. But today we're just going to go over some simple concepts that we keep talking about. If you've been following our channels, if you've been following what we put on our blogs or our LinkedIn, you may have seen these couple of concepts, additionality and emissionality, mentioned. So we figured we'd just pop on here and give you a little preview of what that means and what we mean by those things. We also were really excited to get a shout out in Fast Company last week, and they discussed the concept of emissionality and how Clearloop is implementing it. So if you haven't already checked out that article, please do so. The link is in the bio. Very, very cool and influential. So without further ado, we'll talk about additionality. So additionality is basically, it's a test that sort of the carbon world has put out there to ensure that there is some sort of test, some sort of measure for the actions that different people are taking, like companies that are that are doing offsets, or individuals that are buying their own offsets. So there's a few different tests that are part of that measurement of quantifying whether or not an offset is real, and how do you sort of quantify that. So one of the tests is that of additionality. And so additionality is basically, it's fairly simple. Would that carbon offset, would it have happened without your action? So would that reduction in the greenhouse gas, would it have happened otherwise? Is it above business as usual? So essentially, if we go about our daily lives and that greenhouse gas would have been emitted from whatever thing, whether it's from a methane thing or some other way, and the question is, if your direct action, if your investment in that particular project, did it cause that greenhouse gas to be either avoided or captured or in some way mitigated, and were you the one who caused that to happen? And so that's the test. And so sometimes it's a little, it feels a little bit like additionality is, there's this big question mark about how do you prove that out? There's lots of folks that who are experts in this field, because essentially what we want to make sure is that as people are making claims around greenhouse gas reductions, that those things are actually being measured in some way. And sometimes with sort of traditional carbon solutions that are out there, carbon emissions reductions and carbon offsets, it's a little bit harder to measure exactly how all of that is happening. And so there's these tests, and additionality is a really important and core to that thing. So the way that we measure additionality at Clearloop is basically, would that carbon, would it have been emitted otherwise? And so the big question is, as we introduce more capacity, more clean energy capacity into the grid, we are essentially putting a stint to stop fossil fuels from generating and avoiding carbon. And so there's a few different additionality tests. One is business as usual. Would that solar project have been created without our intervention and without our investment and that of our partners? Or would it have been just business as usual? Would we be continuing to burn fossil fuels for electricity or take longer to decarbonize their grid because the solar projects are not coming online as fast as we need them. And so that's what we're trying to incentivize, is just putting that money so that there's more capacity that's built for solar projects and making sure that we're cleaning up the grid as fast as possible. We know that that's, as we've talked about in a series of these, the number 2 polluter for our carbon footprint in the US is our electricity grid. We have the technology to fix it and to clean it up. And so what we're doing at Clearloop is using the funds that companies are interested in to take as offsets, and using that money to then construct more solar projects around the US to clean up that grid, accelerate the capacity that we have for clean energy electricity. So we're really excited for us to be able to just tackle these concepts head on, but additionality is very, very important and sort of a core tenet to this whole thing. And so as you go out into the world as a consumer or a person in the world, just as companies and people are making claims about how they're offsetting or how they are reducing their greenhouse gas emissions, the big question is this additional? Would that have happened? Would that action have happened if that person or company didn't invest in that particular project? Would it be business as usual, or is this above business as usual? And so for this part of the country, in particular Tennessee, in the middle part of the country, we know that we need to incentivize more construction of clean energy capacity, because right now Tennessee sits at below 1% of our electricity is generated for solar. We're part of the Sun Belt, so we want to make sure that we are increasing the number of solar projects that happen in this part of the country and help clean up so that we no longer have fossil fuels generating our electricity. So that is additional. It would not be happening without the investment of all the companies that are partnering with Clearloop to go build these solar projects around the country. So that's the first concept. But then there's this other concept that we've been talking about and that we've been bringing up in our blogs, and Fast Company article talks about, and it's a term coined by our friends at What Time. They're a nonprofit out of Oakland. And so what they talk about is emissionality as a very important concept, particularly in the way that we generate clean energy. And so emissionality is basically taking that additionality concept and adding this idea that because the grid is not equally dirty, because we make energy from different resources across the United States, and some folks, there's a mix of different things. If there's a really good article the New York Times posts every year that shows state by state what the grid mix is, and so it shows you what percentage comes from coal, from natural gas, which is also fossil fuel, from renewables like wind and solar, and it breaks it down. And so it's incredibly fascinating to just even look at it. But the reality of that whole map is that it shows you that across the United States, because the grid is not equally dirty, there's more emissions, more carbon emissions, more greenhouse gas emissions that come out of the same amount of electricity that we're producing. So in places like California, where their grid mix, they produce electricity from a variety of sources, a big chunk of it being solar, every megawatt hour of electricity, and so that's basically every time they turn on the lights and use electricity, they are producing a certain amount of carbon, and we actually measure it. The EPA has a really easy tool where you can put in your zip code, and it says it's the power profile, and tells you exactly how much carbon your electricity is creating in your particular part of the country. And so if you look at those things, you start seeing this picture that shows you that essentially every time we turn on our lights in California versus every time we turn on our lights here in Tennessee, there's a very different impact on the environment. And that is the crux of the argument, and why Clearloop is really focused on cleaning up the places where we need the most help. The dirtiest of grids, that's what that's referring to, because every time we turn on the lights in California, 700 pounds of carbon get emitted into the atmosphere, because because they're still burning fossil fuels. And then here in Tennessee, for example, by comparison, about 1,300 pounds of electricity or of carbon get emitted into the atmosphere every time. At the same amount of electricity generated in two different states has a dramatically, almost twice as much of an environmental impact on these communities, just for doing the exact same activity. So we can see how that sort of disparity, that sort of inequity in the access to clean energy, as well as the environmental impact, that it has a hugely outsized environmental impact in some of the places in the country where the emissions are higher, even with the same exact activity. So to put a little background for those of you who are tuning in who, like me, didn't know exactly what a megawatt hour means, because when you look at your utility bill, it's kilowatt hour. So basically megawatt hours is this big measurement, but the idea is that Americans use about 10 or so megawatt hours every year. So if you think about that, as you would and your family are using 10 megawatts hours of electricity in your home, and that has twice as big of an impact in a place like Tennessee than it does in California. And so we at Clearloop believe that that's fundamentally not okay. It's not okay that people in the same country have different effects. They have different ways that the electricity is affecting our environment, our health, our well-being, and so we fundamentally believe that access to clean energy should be something that all Americans enjoy, and that's what we are trying to do. That's why we're investing here in this middle part of the country and trying to bring more additional capacity in electricity, but also more and so that meets that additionality test, but also that we're focused on the emissionality, that it really is going into the communities that matter the most. Hey, Aspi, thank you for tuning in. So basically, we just got over two different concepts that sort of rule the world of carbon offsets. The first one is additionality. Did you cause that thing was your direct investment causing that greenhouse gas to be reduced or avoided, and thanks to your contribution, did that happen, or would it have happened otherwise without your contribution? That's the big test. And then the next test that we are implementing, and we want to make sure that we're talking about, is this concept of emissionality, that we are going after the places that need the most investment, especially when it comes to building more renewable energy capacity here in the United States in the communities that are otherwise getting left behind. So those two concepts are going to be fundamental to how we build our projects, because the foundational belief is that here in the US we should all have access to clean energy, and so the way that we do that is by ensuring that there's more capacity that's being built, and that when the private sector says that they want to go ahead, and all these companies and brands are making these commitments to be carbon neutral, net zero, all these wonderful pledges, climate pledges and others, we want to make sure that when they're making that dollar investment, that they're investing in something real, that is additional, that would not have happened otherwise, because we really need to we need to mitigate the number of greenhouse gases that are going into the atmosphere. And the way that we do that is by doing additional projects that help either prevent or capture the greenhouse gases that are already out here. So Clearloop is really focused on preventing, so that we're not burning fossil fuels to create the electricity that we are generating right now. Because I'm sitting in Tennessee, we also know that the carbon impact of my use of electricity is almost twice as bad as that of California. That is not okay. And so here at Clearloop, we want to make sure that as companies are making pledges, they're making investments, that they're investing in the places that need it the most. And we believe that this part of the country is ready. We are ready to break ground here in Jackson, Tennessee in a couple of months for our first solar project. It's going to be 1 megawatt, which is it's enough capacity to be powering 200 homes in the Jackson, Tennessee area. And we are looking forward to building even more in the coming months. So if you are interested in learning more, head over to our website, clearloop.us. For all of you who are following along live, thank you so much for joining us. We hope that we can get better and better at just explaining and making all these different concepts really easy for all of us to understand, because we really will need all hands on deck. So the more you know, the better we will all be equipped to make sure that we're fighting back against climate change. So thank you all so much. Tune in to the next live. I'm not sure when we're going to do it, probably in the next couple of weeks, where we'll be tackling more of these concepts and just making it really easy to make sure that we all know exactly what we're doing when companies and the brands that we love are making commitments, that we are smart about the kind of investments and commitments that they're making, and that we're advocating to really build in the places that need it the most and do the most with that dollar. So thank you all so much. Have a great weekend, and happy Valentine's Day to all of y'all. Bye-bye.